Hello guys, in this video we're just gonna continue our discussion on methods, and as I said in my previous video, we have already been playing with methods for some time without really looking in depth about methods. So before we actually start defining our own methods, I want to show you a couple different things. One is remember when we were dealing with printing output on the screen, we were doing system.out like print or print line. So a couple things here is, remember in like print line methods, um, essentially normally what we have been doing is we were passing a string for the print line, and if you look here you can see all the documentation. We were actually passing a string for the method, which was already built in. It was written by the Java developers, but we have been using that all the time. There is no limit again how many times you can call this method in your own program. So you were passing a string, but notice right next to each method you will see what this method returns. In this case, the print line really returns nothing. All what it does, it just prints on the screen. In contrast, remember when we were dealing with math.random? So if you recall, math.random actually, you would call it returns a double. And we have used this extensively in the sense of, kind of like simulating a dice roll. That's exactly how different methods are different. It's because different methods, they return different data types. And it's going to be the same when it comes to you defining your own methods. You would have to tell, Java exactly what data type your method returns, and that's what actually we're going to be doing in today's video. So hopefully that would make sense to kind of, combine the two videos in this chapter that, we're looking at together. So what we will be doing today is kind of like, again, start really simple. I'm just going to be defining a method. The method is just going to pretty much return an integer number, okay? Just, really simple. Then we're just going to make it kind of a little bit more complicated. So imagine, again, like public static integer, and then just a method name. So for instance, print num. And then this method, since it returns something, in this case, it returns an integer number. So unlike void, I cannot say, well, system out and then print something. Actually, you're going to see an error. It's because in this case, if you look into the error, this method must return a result of type integer. So I can actually still print this, but at the end, I want to say return 1. 1 is obviously an integer or any number. Notice when I did this, the error disappeared. I want to change this to 100. It really doesn't matter. So for the method, there is no problem what exact value it returns as long as the value returned matches the same data type returned by that particular method. If I change this method into double, for instance, now in this case, it's a good practice. Remember, integer into double, there is normally no problem. So it's even better to actually return something like 11.00. That will actually even be better. But imagine I have an integer and still keep it that way. Notice how I got the error, because I'm returning a double, but my method actually should return an integer or expects to return an integer, so that's a problem. So I'm just going to actually keep it something like 100 in this case. Now the way you would actually call the method in here by just a print num. Now here is what happens if I just run the program as of now. This will call the method. The method is actually printing this. So the 100 actually, the method does something, but it's not really reflected on my program. Now, let me do this. Imagine I say, well, int temp is equal to print number, and then I want to print that temp. Let's see what happens. So let me just even comment this, because normally that's how you would, like in the end, what you care about is whatever the method returns. So now notice temp actually holds the value 100. So what I did is I call the function. The function, once it runs, or a method, again, I'm sorry, I keep confusing because, like I have taught Python frequently, at least a couple times last 2 semesters, and then I got confused with Python and Java. So when I call the method, print num executes, and then it returns 100, which means that, because look, when you call print num, the control of your program is gonna go, find whatever method before your main method, execute it, and then the control is gonna go back down to your method print num. So what's gonna happen is this guy essentially is just gonna be really equivalent to whatever that method actually returns. In this case, it's 100. So when I actually assign the integer into this integer variable temp, put the value inside of temp, and then I printed temp, in that case, it's actually 100. So again, if I actually change this to something like a 10, and then execute it, temp would be still equal to 100. Okay, so now let me have another method. Now in this case, it's just gonna be a double method, and then print double, and then in this case, I'll just return 5.5. So now, again, if I call the method print double, if I run the program, there is not going to be any changes in here, because this is going to call the method. This method retains some value, but this value is not really printed on my screen here. So because this method returns a double, if I want to print whatever value it returns, I'm just going to define temp2, for instance, and then I'm just going to actually print that. So temp2, now what's going to happen is I see 5.5 return in here. Okay. Normally, when you write method, it's not going to be just return just some value, because let's say I want to actually have a method now. Let's talk about arguments. That it takes an input based on the input, it returns particular output. So for instance, I'm going to write a method now which takes two integers, add them together, and then returns the sum. So let's do that. Okay, so it's going to be public static. It's going to be integer. So when I add two integers, obviously the sum is integer, and then add nums. So in this case, let's make it again really simple. We're adding two integer numbers. Now these, I'm just going to start defining what's so-called parameters. And then remember, when we talk about methods, these parameters are normally really very general. So, the method is actually, no matter what these two numbers that I give to add nums, this method, the method is just going to add them together. So because I don't know them at the moment, I'm just going to define them int num1, int num2. So these are the data types for num1 and num2, which in this case are both integers. So what I will do is I'm just going to define an integer sum, which is going to be num1 plus num2. And then remember, this method returns an integer. So I'm just going to say we'll return sum. So now to call the method, I'm just going to actually, really delete these. I don't need them. So now I'm just going to actually call add nums. Add nums expect two integers, so this way it just can add them together. So I'm just going to say, well, 10 and 40. And then it returns an integer. So now if I, run the program, there are no errors, but actually there is nothing that's going to be printed on my screen. So now in this case, if let's say I add int temp, because it's an integer again, and then if I do sout temp, here is actually 50, 10 plus 40. Now notice the beautiful thing about methods is I can actually define int temp2, call the method one more time with completely different arguments. So these are actually the 10 and 40 are called arguments. These num1, num2 are called parameters. So the arguments are exact values that you pass to a method. And then I'm just going to provide completely different arguments. So let's say, for instance, like 40, or let's choose completely different ones. So -10 and then -50. And then I just want to print temp2. So we're going to be able to see that -60. And obviously it just goes on and on and on. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. In my next video, we're just going to actually keep developing methods so we get into kind of like, more sophisticated cases. But this should actually get you started on methods. You should be able to understand the concept from, methods with this example. Okay, remember to keep practicing and obviously keep yourself safe in this difficult times. Thank you guys and see you soon. Bye-bye.